The airport lounge manager thought humiliating a tired woman in cheap sneakers would impress the wealthy travelers watching nearby. But he had no idea that within 20 minutes, the same executives who praised him would be begging that woman not to walk away forever. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The massive windows of Terminal B at Reagan National Airport glowed with the pale orange light of early morning as travelers hurried across polished marble floors, dragging expensive luggage behind them. Business executives in tailored suits crowded the premium lounge entrance, flashing platinum cards and boarding passes while soft jazz floated through hidden ceiling speakers. Near the automatic glass doors, Evelyn Carter stepped quietly into the line wearing a light gray sweater, dark jeans, and white sneakers that showed faint signs of travel dust. Her blonde hair was tied back in a simple low ponytail, and the only thing remotely expensive about her appearance was the elegant silver watch partially hidden beneath her sleeve. Most people barely looked at her twice. And that was exactly how Evelyn preferred it. At 39 years old, Evelyn had spent the last decade building one of the fastest-growing aviation technology companies in America, but very few people outside the corporate world recognized her face. She had learned long ago that wealth attracted attention, but simplicity revealed character. As she approached the lounge scanner, a young receptionist glanced at her boarding pass, hesitated, then forced a tight professional smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said carefully. "This lounge is reserved for premium executive guests." Evelyn remained calm. "I understand," she replied softly. "I'm meeting someone inside." Before the receptionist could answer, a sharp voice interrupted from behind the counter. "Then your someone can come meet you out here." Damian Brooks stepped forward with the confidence of a man who enjoyed deciding who belonged and who did not. His navy suit was perfectly pressed, his gold name badge polished to mirror brightness, and his expression carried the cold superiority that years of managing elite clients had carved into him. He looked Evelyn up and down once, lingering on her sneakers just long enough to make the insult obvious. Several nearby travelers noticed immediately. A man sipping espresso lowered his newspaper. Two women seated near the windows exchanged amused glances. Damien folded his hands politely, though his tone carried no warmth whatsoever. "This lounge is for board members, executives, and first-class international clients," he explained loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Not economy passengers looking for a place to rest." A faint ripple of laughter spread through the seating area. Evelyn's face remained composed, but her blue eyes sharpened slightly. "I'm not looking for trouble," she said. "I only need 10 minutes." Damien smiled the way people smiled before shutting a door in someone's face. "And I need people to follow the rules." He motioned toward the crowded terminal behind her. "There are public seats downstairs near Gate 14. The room grew quieter now, the tension settling across the marble lounge like static electricity before a storm. Evelyn slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She typed a short message, no more than 4 words, then slipped the phone away without another argument. Damien noticed the calmness in her expression and smirked. "You can text whoever you want," he said confidently. "It won't change anything." 20 seconds later, his work phone began to ring. Damien glanced at the vibrating phone on his belt, barely interested at first, but the moment he saw the internal executive line flashing across the screen, his expression shifted for less than a second before the arrogance returned to his face. He answered casually, still staring directly at Evelyn. "VIP Executive Lounge, Damian Brooks speaking." The noise inside the lounge softened as several nearby travelers continued pretending not to listen while clearly following every word. Damien's confident posture slowly stiffened. "No, sir," he said carefully. "I have not seen anyone by that name." A pause followed. His eyes drifted toward Evelyn again. "Gray sweater," he repeated slowly into the phone. "Blonde hair." The room seemed to tighten around him. Evelyn stood silently beside the marble reception desk, one hand resting lightly on the handle of her carry-on suitcase. She showed no satisfaction, no anger, no urgency. That calmness unsettled him more than shouting ever could have. Damien ended the call quickly and forced out a short laugh. "Interesting coincidence," he said loudly. "Someone upstairs is apparently looking for an Evelyn Carter." He tilted his head slightly. "That would not happen to be you, would it?" Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. "Yes," she answered simply. A man seated near the champagne counter snorted softly. Another traveler muttered, "Sure it is." Damien smiled again, but now the smile looked strained around the edges. "And let me guess," he said, "you are also the investor everyone is waiting for." Evelyn did not respond immediately. The silence itself became uncomfortable. Nearby guests exchanged glances while the young receptionist behind the counter shifted nervously in place. Her name tag read Chloe Bennett, and unlike Damien, she no longer looked amused. Earlier she had assumed Evelyn was simply confused about lounge access. Now doubt crept into her expression. Chloe quietly checked the reservation tablet again, her fingers trembling slightly against the glass screen. She noticed a highlighted executive arrival notice marked confidential, but before she could study it further, Damien turned sharply toward her. "Chloe," he said coldly, "stop wasting time and clear the entrance." She hesitated. "Sir, maybe we should verify." "There is nothing to verify," Damien interrupted. His voice carried across the lounge now, pulling more attention toward the scene. "We have standards here." Evelyn finally spoke again, her tone still calm enough to contrast painfully against Damien's growing irritation. "I already explained that I am meeting someone inside." Damien crossed his arms. "And I already explained that important guests do not arrive dressed for a grocery run." A few people laughed openly this time. The sound echoed against the glass walls and polished floors. Chloe's face tightened uncomfortably. She looked at Evelyn again and noticed details she had missed before. The silver watch was understated, but unmistakably expensive. The carry-on luggage was custom Italian leather. More importantly, Evelyn carried herself with the kind of quiet composure Chloe had only seen from people who never needed to prove anything. Damien stepped closer to the reception counter and lowered his voice just enough to sound dangerous without raising it. "Listen carefully, ma'am. I do not know what kind of misunderstanding you are trying to create here, but executives upstairs are preparing for a critical board meeting worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I will not allow distractions." Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly for the first time. "That meeting is exactly why I am here." The lounge went silent again. Even the bartender stopped polishing glasses. Damien stared at her for 2 long seconds before letting out a sharp breath through his nose. "All right," he said suddenly, his voice louder now, performative again. "Since you are insisting in front of everyone, let us make this very simple." He pointed toward the security desk near the elevators. "Show us your executive authorization email right now, in front of everyone, or I will personally escort you out of this lounge." The tension inside the executive lounge thickened instantly after Damien demanded proof in front of everyone. Travelers who had originally tried to ignore the confrontation were now openly watching, their conversations fading into whispers beneath the soft piano music drifting from hidden speakers. A businessman near the coffee station leaned back in his chair with visible curiosity, while 2 flight attendants standing near the entrance exchanged uncomfortable looks. Chloe remained frozen behind the marble counter, her fingers hovering uncertainly above the reservation tablet. Evelyn stood perfectly still beneath the cold airport lighting, one hand resting lightly against her suitcase handle. She neither rushed nor panicked, and somehow that calmness irritated Damien even more. Most people in embarrassing situations either argued or apologized. Evelyn did neither. Damien extended his hand impatiently. "Well," he asked loudly, "if you are supposedly connected to this meeting upstairs, then showing your authorization should be very easy." Evelyn slowly unlocked her phone. Several nearby guests leaned subtly forward, eager to watch the moment she failed. Damien's confident expression returned fully now, feeding on the attention gathering around him. This was no longer about policy. It had become performance. Public humiliation wrapped in professionalism. Evelyn opened her email inbox calmly, but before she could respond, Damien noticed her boarding pass partially visible inside her passport holder. He reached toward it before Chloe could react. "Economy Plus," he announced after glancing down at the ticket. His voice carried through the lounge with sharp satisfaction. Interesting choice for someone claiming to be connected to a nine-figure board negotiation. A few people chuckled openly again. Someone near the window muttered, "This is getting embarrassing." Chloe lowered her eyes, visibly uncomfortable now. Evelyn carefully took the boarding pass back without anger. "I do not choose flights to impress strangers," she replied quietly. Damien gave a dry laugh. "That must make life easier." He stepped aside dramatically, gesturing toward the crowded terminal outside the glass entrance where exhausted travelers sat shoulder to shoulder near charging stations and fast food counters. Meanwhile, our actual executive guests prefer privacy, comfort, and security. The words landed exactly as intended. The contrast between the elegant lounge and the noisy public terminal suddenly felt painfully deliberate. Evelyn noticed several passengers studying her clothes again, searching for signs that Damien must be right. Expensive places often train people to trust appearances more than facts. Then something small shifted the atmosphere. As Evelyn reached into her bag, a slim silver card holder slipped briefly into view before falling onto the counter with a soft click. One card partially slid out. Chloe's eyes widened the instant she saw the embossed logo, Auraline Aerotech. The company name alone carried enormous weight in aviation circles. Before Chloe could speak, Damien quickly snatched the card and glanced at it dismissively. "Very impressive," he said sarcastically. "Anyone can print luxury business cards these days." He tossed it back onto the counter carelessly. But Chloe noticed something Damien did not. In the lower corner of the card, beneath the company logo, was a discreet platinum insignia reserved only for founding executives. Her stomach tightened. She had seen that same insignia during internal airport presentations regarding the confidential acquisition deal currently terrifying the airport board. Chloe opened her mouth slightly, then stopped herself. Damien was already turning back toward the growing audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with theatrical politeness, "we appear to have someone attempting to force access into a restricted executive space during a critical corporate negotiation." Several travelers looked away awkwardly now, but nobody intervened. Public embarrassment had become entertainment. Evelyn finally lifted her eyes directly toward Damien. "You still have time to handle this differently," she said softly. For the first time, something in her voice unsettled him. Not fear, not anger, certainty, but arrogance had already carried him too far. Damien smiled tightly and motioned toward the security desk beside the elevators. Two airport security officers immediately started walking toward the lounge entrance as the room fell into complete silence. The two airport security officers approached the executive lounge with measured steps, their polished black shoes echoing softly across the marble floor as conversations throughout the room faded into tense silence. Damien straightened his suit jacket with visible satisfaction, feeding off the attention surrounding him. He had crossed beyond simple enforcement now. This had become personal. Travelers who had only been mildly curious moments earlier were openly staring, waiting to see how the quiet woman in the gray sweater would react once security became involved. Chloe stood frozen behind the reception desk, her face pale with unease. She kept glancing between Evelyn and the silver business card resting on the counter like a warning nobody wanted to acknowledge. One of the security officers gave Damien a questioning look. "Problem here, sir?" Damien folded his hands confidently. "Yes, this woman has repeatedly refused to leave a restricted executive area despite multiple requests." The words landed heavily in the air. Several nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Saying someone did not belong somewhere always sounded uglier when spoken aloud. Evelyn looked toward the security officers calmly. "I have not refused anything," she said gently. "I only asked for 10 minutes. Damien shook his head immediately, cutting across her voice before she could continue. "This lounge operates under strict executive clearance. We cannot allow random individuals to wander into sensitive corporate spaces simply because they claim to know someone important." The phrase "random individuals" drew a few nervous laughs from the crowd, though they sounded weaker now. Chloe swallowed hard. She could feel the atmosphere changing beneath the surface, like pressure building before a storm. One of the officers turned politely toward Evelyn. "Ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to step outside the lounge area." Evelyn nodded slowly as though she had expected this outcome all along. She reached down for her suitcase handle with steady hands. No anger, No pleading. That composure unsettled the room more than any argument could have. Damien noticed it too, and somehow it irritated him further. People were supposed to shrink after public humiliation. Evelyn seemed almost untouched by it. As she prepared to leave, Damien delivered one final blow, his voice carrying deliberately across the lounge. Next time, ma'am, I would recommend checking whether you actually belong somewhere before creating a scene. The words hung in the cold airport air like a slap. Chloe's eyes widened in disbelief. Even several travelers looked uncomfortable now. Evelyn paused beside the glass entrance doors without turning around immediately. For a brief second, the entire lounge became completely silent except for the distant boarding announcements echoing through the terminal outside. Then she slowly looked back over her shoulder. Her blue eyes settled calmly on Damien. The interesting thing about places built on status, she said softly, is that they often forget respect should never require proof. Nobody moved. Even Damien's confident posture stiffened slightly. Evelyn continued in the same quiet tone. One day you will realize that the easiest way to destroy a company is to teach employees that appearances matter more than people. The room went utterly still. No laughter followed this time. No whispered comments. Just silence spreading across the marble lounge while travelers avoided eye contact with one another. Damien forced out a dismissive smile, though uncertainty flickered briefly across his face for the first time all morning. "Thank you for the life lesson," he replied coldly. "Now please leave." Evelyn gave a small nod. Nothing more. She rolled her suitcase through the glass doors and stepped back into the crowded terminal where exhausted families sat beside charging stations and delayed passengers slept against backpacks beneath fluorescent lights. The contrast between the luxury lounge and the ordinary terminal suddenly felt painfully sharp. Through the glass walls, several people inside continued watching her walk slowly toward Gate 14 alone. Chloe stared at the silver business card still resting on the counter, her heartbeat quickening as a terrible realization began forming in her mind. And then, from somewhere upstairs, the executive elevator doors suddenly opened. Evelyn walked slowly through the crowded terminal as rolling suitcase wheels rattled across the tile floors around her, and boarding announcements echoed overhead in tired mechanical voices. Families crowded near charging stations while exhausted travelers slept against their backpacks beneath harsh fluorescent lights. Yet somehow the noise around her felt distant now, drowned beneath the quiet disappointment settling deep inside her chest. She stopped near the large windows overlooking the runway where rain clouds hung low above the airport, turning the morning sky pale gray. For a moment, she simply stood there with one hand resting against her suitcase handle, watching planes taxi across the wet tarmac. Most people inside the terminal saw only another traveler pushed out of a luxury lounge. None of them knew that this airport carried memories Evelyn had spent years trying to honor. 10 years earlier, before the billion-dollar contracts and executive meetings, before magazine covers and boardrooms, she had stood in this same airport beside her father as he prepared for one final flight home after months of cancer treatment. Richard Carter had been a commercial pilot for nearly 30 years, a man who believed airports were supposed to represent dignity, trust, and humanity. Even during his worst days, he treated every passenger and airport employee with equal kindness. Evelyn still remembered him smiling weakly from his wheelchair while thanking a janitor by name for helping him find his gate. "Never confuse power with worth," he had whispered to her that day. "The people who keep the world moving are often the ones nobody notices." Those words had shaped her entire life. After his death, Evelyn built Auraline Aerotech, not just to modernize aviation technology, but to improve the human side of travel itself. Fair treatment, respect, quiet dignity. That was why today mattered more than any board deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. This airport had become the final candidate for Auraline's National Expansion Partnership, a contract capable of saving thousands of jobs and rebuilding failing airport infrastructure across the East Coast. And now, after what she had witnessed upstairs, Evelyn was no longer certain they deserved it. "Ma'am," a nervous voice said softly behind her. Evelyn turned to find Chloe standing several feet away, slightly out of breath from hurrying through the terminal. Without the polished marble desks separating them, Chloe suddenly looked much younger and far less confident. "I should not be down here," Chloe admitted quietly. "But I needed to say I am sorry." Evelyn studied her for a moment, then offered a faint, reassuring smile. You do not need to apologize for someone else's choices. Chloe lowered her eyes. I should have spoken up sooner. That becomes harder when people are afraid of losing their jobs. Evelyn replied gently. Chloe looked surprised by the kindness in her voice. I recognize the insignia on your business card, she confessed carefully. I attended one of the internal presentations last month. The board has been panicking for weeks waiting for your decision. Evelyn glanced back toward the rain-covered runway. A company reveals itself most honestly when nobody important is watching. Chloe swallowed hard. Then, does this mean the deal is over? Evelyn did not answer immediately. Nearby, the deep roar of jet engines vibrated faintly through the massive terminal windows, while thunder rolled somewhere in the distance beyond the runway lights. Finally, she looked back at Chloe with tired but steady eyes. I have spent my entire career believing businesses can choose dignity over arrogance, she said softly. Today tested that belief. Chloe's expression tightened with guilt. Before she could respond, a sudden commotion erupted from the far end of the terminal. Fast footsteps struck the polished floor in rapid succession. Voices echoed sharply through the crowd. Then several men in dark executive suits appeared near the escalators, scanning the terminal with visible urgency as the entire atmosphere shifted instantly. The group of executives moved quickly through the terminal with the tense urgency of people realizing something had gone terribly wrong. Their polished dress shoes struck the floor in sharp rhythm, while travelers instinctively stepped aside to let them pass. At the center of the group was Leonard Graves, chairman of the airport board, a silver-haired man in his 60s whose face now carried none of the calm confidence he normally projected during investor meetings. Beside him hurried two senior legal advisors and the airport operations director, all scanning the terminal with growing alarm. Chloe straightened immediately the moment she recognized them. Her heart began pounding harder when Leonard's eyes locked directly onto Evelyn standing near the runway windows. The change in his expression was immediate. Relief collided with panic so visibly that even nearby passengers noticed it. Miss Carter, Leonard called breathlessly as he approached. Thank God you are still here. The surrounding terminal seemed to freeze. Travelers who had only moments earlier ignored Evelyn now turned openly toward her. Chloe glanced toward the executive lounge upstairs through the glass mezzanine level and saw Damien emerging near the escalators, confusion already spreading across his face as he noticed the board members gathered around the woman he had just thrown out. Leonard stopped directly in front of Evelyn, visibly shaken. We have been trying to reach you for the last 15 minutes, he said. The board meeting cannot begin without you. Evelyn remained calm, though her eyes stayed distant. It seems your staff already made their decision about whether I belonged here. Leonard's expression tightened instantly. What does that mean? Chloe swallowed hard. One of the legal advisors quietly whispered something into Leonard's ear while pointing subtly toward the executive lounge above them. Understanding spread across Leonard's face with horrifying speed. He looked back at Evelyn in disbelief. Please tell me there has been some misunderstanding. Evelyn said nothing. She simply glanced upward toward the lounge entrance where Damien now stood completely motionless beside the railing. Even from across the terminal, the color draining from his face was unmistakable. The realization hit him all at once. The silver card, the executive call, the confidence in her voice, the board's desperation. Every moment replayed violently inside his mind. Damien gripped the railing tighter as cold panic settled into his stomach. Leonard followed Evelyn's gaze upward and immediately understood. His jaw tightened. Who removed her from the executive lounge? He demanded sharply. Nobody answered at first. The silence itself became an accusation. Then Chloe stepped forward quietly, her voice trembling. Damien Brooks, sir. Across the mezzanine level, Damien finally began moving again, descending the escalator slowly now, no longer carrying the confidence he had displayed earlier. Travelers parted around him as whispers spread rapidly through the terminal. Several passengers from the lounge recognized Evelyn instantly now, their earlier amusement collapsing into visible embarrassment. Leonard took a slow breath, trying to steady himself before speaking again. Ms. Carter, he said carefully, Auraline Aerotech's investment would keep 3 regional airports operational and protect over 8,000 jobs. We have spent 6 months preparing for today. Evelyn looked toward the rain-covered runway again. And in less than 20 minutes, she replied softly. Your airport showed me exactly how it treats people without status. The words landed harder than shouting ever could have. Nobody nearby moved. Even the terminal noise suddenly felt muted beneath the weight of what was unfolding. Damien finally reached the bottom of the escalator. His perfectly controlled image was gone now, replaced by the unmistakable fear of a man realizing his arrogance had just detonated in public. Leonard turned toward him slowly, disbelief hardening into fury. Tell me, he said coldly, that you did not remove Evelyn Carter from our executive lounge. Damien opened his mouth, but no words came out. Evelyn finally faced him directly for the first time since leaving upstairs. Her expression remained calm, almost unbearably calm. Then she spoke one quiet sentence that seemed to drain the oxygen from the entire terminal. You did not insult a traveler today, Mr. Brooks. You insulted the future of this airport. The terminal remained frozen beneath the pale airport lights after Evelyn's words settled over the crowd. Travelers stood motionless beside rolling suitcases while boarding announcements echoed faintly in the distance like sounds from another world. Damien's face had lost all color now. The same man who had spoken with effortless superiority 20 minutes earlier suddenly looked smaller, uncertain, almost fragile beneath the weight of hundreds of eyes watching him. Leonard Graves stepped closer slowly, his voice low with controlled anger. Is it true, he asked. Did you remove Ms. Carter from the executive lounge after she identified herself? Damien swallowed hard. Sir, she never clearly explained who she was. Chloe immediately looked up, unable to stay silent anymore. That is not true. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she continued. She told us she was there for the executive meeting. She showed us her name. And when I saw the Oraline insignia on her card, I tried to stop things from escalating. The entire atmosphere shifted again. Several travelers who had laughed earlier now looked deeply uncomfortable. Damien turned toward Chloe in disbelief. You are seriously going to stand there and undermine your own manager? Chloe met his eyes carefully. I am trying to tell the truth. Leonard's expression hardened further. Around them, airport employees had begun quietly gathering near the terminal entrance after hearing whispers spread through internal radios that the mysterious investor from Oraline Aerotech had been publicly humiliated by airport staff. Evelyn remained silent through all of it. She neither demanded punishment nor enjoyed Damien's humiliation. That restraint made the moment feel even heavier. Leonard looked back toward her with visible regret. Miss Carter, I want to personally apologize for this disgraceful treatment. Evelyn shook her head softly. This was never about me being embarrassed. Her calm voice carried clearly through the silent terminal. It was about what happens to ordinary people who do not have executives chasing after them 20 minutes later. Several nearby employees lowered their eyes. The words cut deeper because everyone knew she was right. Evelyn glanced toward the crowded public seating area nearby where exhausted passengers waited beside crying children and delayed flights. You know what I noticed first when I arrived this morning? She continued quietly. Not the lounge. Not the luxury finishes. I noticed a janitor helping an elderly traveler carry her bags down a broken escalator because nobody else stopped to help her. Leonard looked confused for a moment. Evelyn continued. That janitor treated her with more dignity than your executive lounge treated me. The terminal fell completely silent again. Damien stared downward now, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Then another truth surfaced, one far larger than anyone expected. One of the legal advisors beside Leonard cleared his throat carefully. There is something else everyone here should probably understand. He looked toward the gathering crowd before continuing. Oraline Aerotech has already quietly funded airport employee scholarship programs in 6 states over the last 4 years. Murmurs spread immediately through the terminal. Chloe's eyes widened. The advisor nodded toward Evelyn respectfully. The customer service training program this airport implemented last year, Ms. Carter paid for it personally after her father passed away. Damien looked up sharply at that. Evelyn's expression softened slightly as she glanced toward the rain beyond the windows. My father believed airports should remind people that humanity matters, she said quietly. That was all I wanted to continue. A heavy silence settled over everyone listening. The woman they had dismissed as unimportant had spent years quietly improving the very industry that had humiliated her. Not for recognition, not for applause, simply because she believed people deserved kindness. The travelers who once smirked at her now watched with something entirely different in their eyes. Respect, shame, admiration. Even the airport staff standing near the escalators looked at Evelyn differently now, not as an executive, but as someone whose calm dignity had exposed every ugly assumption in the room without ever raising her voice. Leonard took a slow breath before speaking again. "Ms. Carter," he said carefully, "after everything that happened here today, why would you still consider helping this airport at all?" Evelyn looked at him steadily for a long moment. Then, very softly, she answered, "Because the people who deserve help most are usually the ones trapped inside broken systems they did not create." Rain tapped softly against the massive terminal windows as the tension slowly settled into something quieter, heavier, and far more human. The crowd that had gathered around Evelyn no longer looked at her with curiosity alone. Their expressions carried the uncomfortable awareness of having witnessed something deeply unfair unfold in plain sight. Leonard Graves stood beside her silently for several seconds before finally turning toward Damien. The chairman's disappointment seemed to age him visibly beneath the cold terminal lighting. "Effective immediately," Leonard said calmly. "Mr. Brooks will be suspended pending a full internal review of executive access policies and employee conduct procedures." Damien lowered his eyes. There was no argument left inside him now. The arrogance that had carried him through the morning had completely collapsed beneath the reality of what he had done. But Evelyn spoke before the moment could turn cruel. "Do not make him the entire scapegoat," she said quietly. Leonard looked at her with surprise. So did everyone else nearby. Evelyn continued calmly. "People do not become like this alone. Systems teach them what matters." Somewhere along the way, this airport started rewarding appearances more than character. Her words landed with quiet precision. Leonard slowly nodded, understanding immediately. This was no longer just about one manager humiliating the wrong traveler. It was about a culture that allowed dignity to become conditional. Evelyn glanced toward Chloe, who still stood nervously near the terminal windows. "She tried to stop it," Evelyn said, "even when she was afraid." Chloe's eyes widened slightly. Leonard turned toward her. "Is that true?" Chloe hesitated before nodding softly. Leonard gave a thoughtful look toward the young receptionist whose honesty had risked her own position moments earlier. "Then perhaps this airport still has the right people after all." Within minutes, the conversation shifted from damage control to change itself. Evelyn agreed to continue the board meeting, but only under one condition. "I want mandatory dignity and service training implemented across every department," she said. "Not only for executives. Everyone. Security, customer service, management, lounge staff, contractors. Every person travelers encounter inside this airport." Leonard nodded immediately. "Done." "And scholarship funding for entry-level employees who want to continue their education," Evelyn added. "Especially workers most people overlook." Leonard exchanged a glance with the legal advisors before answering again. "We can make that happen." Nearby airport employees listened carefully now, stunned that the woman publicly humiliated only minutes earlier was using her influence not for revenge, but to create opportunities for others. The shift in atmosphere was unmistakable. Travelers who once watched Evelyn with amusement now stepped aside respectfully as she walked through the terminal. One older woman quietly touched Evelyn's arm as she passed and whispered, "Thank you for saying what most people are too afraid to say." Evelyn smiled gently but kept walking. Across the terminal, Damien remained near the escalator, silent and motionless while employees carried on around him. For the first time in years, he saw the airport differently. Not as a hierarchy of important and unimportant people, but as thousands of strangers carrying invisible stories through difficult moments of their lives. He remembered the exhaustion on Evelyn's face when she first entered the lounge, the calmness in her voice, the warning she had given him. "You still have time to handle this differently." The realization settled painfully inside him that she had offered him dignity long before anyone offered it to her. Leonard approached Damien quietly. "You built your entire judgment around clothing and status," he said, "and you almost cost this airport everything because of it." Damien stared toward the rain beyond the terminal windows. Travelers continued moving past him in every direction now, but for the first time, he truly noticed them. The tired parents, the janitors, the nervous young employees. The elderly passengers struggling with luggage. People he had trained himself not to see unless they looked important enough. His voice came out barely above a whisper. I thought professionalism meant protecting exclusivity. Leonard looked at him steadily for a long moment before answering. No, he said softly. Professionalism means treating people with dignity before you know whether they can benefit you. 3 months later, the atmosphere inside Reagan National Airport felt noticeably different. The executive lounge still carried its polished marble floors and quiet luxury, but something deeper had changed beneath the surface. Employees greeted exhausted travelers with patience instead of suspicion. Security officers now received customer care recognition alongside executive staff. Scholarship notices for airport workers hung beside departure screens throughout the terminal. And above the lounge entrance, framed in understated silver lettering, a new company principle had been installed after the board's unanimous vote: dignity before status. On a quiet autumn morning, Evelyn Carter walked through the terminal once again, wearing the same simple gray sweater and white sneakers that had once made people dismiss her. This time, however, employees nodded warmly as she passed. Some recognized her. Most simply recognized the culture she had fought to protect. Near the reception desk, Chloe now stood confidently in a navy blazer with a new title displayed beneath her name tag: Guest Experience Supervisor. The promotion had surprised her more than anyone. When Leonard Graves offered her the position after her honesty during the incident, she almost turned it down, afraid she was not qualified. Evelyn had been the one to encourage her. Integrity qualifies people more often than confidence does, she told her during their last meeting. Chloe smiled brightly the moment she saw Evelyn approaching the lounge entrance. Welcome back, Miss Carter. Evelyn smiled softly. Good morning, Chloe. There was no tension now. No whispers. Only quiet respect flowing naturally through the space. As Evelyn entered the lounge, she noticed small details everywhere. Lounge attendants helping elderly travelers with bags. Employees kneeling beside confused passengers instead of pointing from a distance. Staff treating every traveler with equal patience regardless of their clothes or ticket class. The airport had not become perfect, but it had become more human. Leonard Graves soon joined her beside the runway windows carrying 2 cups of coffee. The employee satisfaction reports have nearly doubled, he said with a faint smile. Passenger complaints are down 40%. Evelyn accepted the coffee gratefully. People usually reflect the dignity they receive. Leonard nodded thoughtfully. I think that lesson changed more people than you realize. For a moment, they stood quietly together watching planes rise into the pale morning sky. Then Leonard glanced toward the lounge entrance where another figure had just stepped inside. Damian Brooks. He no longer wore the polished authority of a lounge manager. After completing the internal review process and mandatory retraining program, he had accepted reassignment to airport passenger assistance services rather than resigning. The position came with less prestige and less power, but for the first time in years, he had started speaking directly with ordinary travelers instead of managing status around them. Damien approached slowly, visibly nervous. Evelyn turned toward him calmly. Ms. Carter, he said quietly, I know apologizing cannot erase what happened. He hesitated, searching carefully for words that sounded honest rather than defensive. But I was wrong about more than you. I was wrong about what respect actually means. Evelyn studied him for a moment before answering softly. The important thing is whether you learned from it. Damien nodded immediately. I did. His voice lowered further. Every day since then, there was no dramatic forgiveness. No emotional speech. Just 2 people standing in quiet understanding beneath the soft airport lights. And somehow that made the moment feel more real. Nearby, Chloe watched the exchange with a small smile before helping an exhausted young mother organize her boarding documents. Outside the windows, another plane lifted into the brightening sky while sunlight slowly spread across the runway. Evelyn looked out at it for a long moment, thinking about her father and the promise she had carried all these years. Airports were never truly about wealth or exclusivity. They were crossroads of human lives, places where people carried fear, hope, grief, exhaustion, and love from one destination to another. And that morning, everyone inside Reagan National Airport remembered something simple but powerful. Dignity does not reveal itself through status. It reveals itself through the people humble enough to recognize it.